Welcome back. Annastacia, well, we've spoken about the influence that your grandfather had on your father. Did he have a big influence on you growing up? Was he your grandparents very much involved in the family on a day-to-day basis?
Probably not on a day-to-day basis. On my father's side, my grandfather, we'd go and visit him usually once a week on weekends and just have a catch-up.
All living in and around pretty much the same area?
Oh, absolutely. My whole family lived within about 5 kilometres of each other. So we were in Durack, growing up in Durack. My grandmother on my mother's side was living in Oxley, and my aunt was living in Durack. So there was a lot of family around and a lot of support.
We were talking before we started, we were talking about your grandfather and his friends growing in. I guess it's a kind of a migrant tradition because we see it down in Stones Corner now and everywhere else where him and his Polish mates holding court in the Inala Civic Centre in the mornings.
That's right. They used to actually call my grandfather the Lord Mayor of Inala. So every morning he would be up there at the Inala Plaza and people would stop and have a chat and just talk about, what was happening in the local community, and he'd be there with his Polish friends. And I just think now it's interesting how Inala has changed because there used to be that sort of, Polish group that was coming together in the Inala Plaza. And now the other part of the Inala Plaza is now completely Vietnamese because 20% of my electorate is Vietnamese. So very, very strong community. And now you'll see that members of those community are actually holding court. So the changing demographics.
Yeah, and Brisbane's demographic is changing right across the board.
Absolutely.
Has that changed the need to communicate with the Vietnamese community, for example? Do you speak any Vietnamese?
When I was first elected, I actually did learn Vietnamese. So when the Premier came out to the Vietnamese Tet Festival, I actually introduced the Premier entirely in Vietnamese. However, as being a minister, it's just been too hard for me to keep up those language classes, but it is something I do want to get back to.
So how do you deal with the particular language problems? Because I'm sure even though it's 2011, you still might have some problems dealing with older members of the community whose English is not as good.
Well, the Vietnamese community have been here now for quite a few years. So what you find is that their children and now their grandchildren can communicate quite freely in English. So if, for example, one of their grandparents was coming in to see me, they would actually bring their son or daughter to help with the translation.
Well, that's a magnificent part of that community that continues.
Yes,
the grandchildren helping out the grandparents and helping them make their way through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must say too, there's great Vietnamese restaurants out there.
Of course. I mean, your grandfather must have been very proud of the achievements of your father, Henry Palaszczuk.
Yes.
I mean, in Parliament for 20 odd years. What do you remember about your grandfather's influence on your father when he was making his career through politics?
Definitely the push for education and also making my father never forget the basics in the community. So I think that was very strong. They also conversed a lot in Polish, which I couldn't understand. So they would actually talk in the Polish language. But yeah, definitely a strong influence with education and just those sort of, familiar, father-son sort of relationship.
Has that kind of relationship mirrored itself with your father and yourself?
Oh, I think so, yeah. My father and I speak quite regularly.
Not so much in Polish?
No, definitely not in Polish, but it's usually if I'm not doing something right. So, it's, you've got to get back out to those schools a bit more, or why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? But he's been a very strong influence, and he had, he left very big boots to fill, and he was always out in the community. He was always working hard, and I just think that he's actually passed that on to me. So he's actually stepped back quite a lot. He's only involved in a couple of community organisations out there now, but everybody asks me, whether it's in the community, whether it's in Brisbane, or whether it's out in regional Queensland, everybody asks me, how's your father going?
Is he an old hardhead in respect of his daughter being in politics now, or is he kind of mellowed? Is he a gentle guiding hand, or does he have a bit of a firm push in the back every now and then? Oh,
look, when it comes to election campaigns, he'll be out there, working hard. But no, I think he just lets me do my own thing. I'm my own person, and he's quite happy with the decisions that I've made. So, but it's always good to sometimes bounce an idea off him.
Is that easy to bounce ideas off him?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Do you think he still takes as much enjoyment from you being involved in politics as he did in his own involvement? Has it sort of changed slightly the way he relates to it?
No, not really. I actually think now that he's retired, it's given him great opportunities to spend more time with my other sisters. So My sister Nadia has a little girl, Annie, who's 3. So he spends a lot of time, every Friday I think is babysitting duty.
Oh, yeah.
And then my other sister Catherine has had the first grandson, little Harry. So I think Harry's, sort of captured his attention at the moment.
First grandson, yes.
First grandson.
Very proud grandfather,
yes, yeah. So it's actually good that he's actually been able to spend a lot more time with them, and I think he's sort of helping them more with their teaching careers, and he's sort of quite prepared to let me do my own thing.
And none of your other siblings sort of ever interested in politics? More than a general family interest, I guess?
No, not really. My sister Catherine for a while worked as a union organiser for the Shoppies Union for many years, but now she works in the public service. But the other 2 sisters are teachers. Nadia's a prep school teacher, and my other sister Julia works at Marist Brothers Ashgrove.
Oh, okay. Great school. Yeah,
yes, very good school.
Yeah. Why did you choose politics when you did? Was it something that you always had in the back of your mind that you thought you might move on to? Because you had a sort of a long career of studying, going to university. You've had scholarships in the UK.
Yes.
Why politics at the time?
Well, I think it was a crossroads in my life, and I had been studying to be admitted as a lawyer, and I had thought about pursuing a career as a barrister. It's something that I've always wanted to do. And then my father announced his retirement, and there were a lot of other people who were actually thinking about contesting the seat as well. And I just thought about the work that my father had done in the local community, and at that stage I was involved with quite a number of community groups. I was involved with the Southwest Community Organisation, I was on the ambulance committee, so I still had continued my links with the community, and I was still living out in the community. So I made the decision that if you're going to change policy and if you're going to make a difference, then you have to put your hand up. And at the heart of it is always about helping people and putting them number one. And I don't think that anyone should go into politics unless you do put people first.
Very much so. It's the foremost requirement of being in the job, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You're watching Meet the Ministers. My guest on the program this evening is Annastacia Palaszczuk, and we'll be back after the break.